I'm Catherine Williams. I'm one of two deputy directors in the Scottish Government who cover our heat and buildings policy. We're focusing here within my area on decarbonisation of heat. As you'll be aware that the way we heat our homes currently accounts for about 20% of our carbon emissions. And again, when I say decarbonisation of heat within the Scottish Government, the kind of key primary pathway we see for that is the electrification of heat. It's not particularly novel. It's done. Scandinavia would be the normal sort of place you'd point to, is actually large-scale deployment of both heat pumps, but also district heating. It's the technology where there's constant innovation and kind of new thinking, and I think about, say, what they're doing in Stockholm at the moment, where they're trying to move to their district heating network being powered by at least 10% from the waste heat from data centres, and they've created a market by which their data centres can sell kind of their heat in the same way we might sell electricity, so heat back into the heat network. Other countries in Europe are facing exactly the same challenge in this space as us, and actually are already kind of probably several steps further than us across the United Kingdom and in Scotland. You know, France, Germany, Holland, they're all putting in place and taking action and starting to see the deployment of particularly heat pumps growing over the last few years. We think studies have shown about 20% of Scotland will be suitable for big district heating networks. And they'll be powered from everything from waste heat from manufacturing centres, from recycling centres, from the river, like they already are at River Clyde, taking the heat out of the Clyde, which always slightly blows my mind, and using that to heat swimming pools, leisure centre, colleges, homes, hopefully a hospital in future. So this year I have a capital budget of £320 million to support the transition to both energy efficiency retrofit and clean heating. About 150 million of that supports those who need it most through our fuel poverty schemes. And so that's hugely valuable. It supports about 5,000 households a year.
We're currently committed to allocating at least £1.8 billion through the Scottish Government over the course of this parliamentary session. And out of all the UK nations, Scotland has the most generous funding package in terms of grants and loans available to households that want to switch to clean heating. There is no path to net zero without an ambitious approach to getting away from fossil fuel and polluting heating. And it's one that we haven't seen accelerated in the way that it should have done for the last 15 years. If we're going to do it, though, it has to be done in a way that's fair and proportionate. And in particular, in the context of the last couple of years, we have to recognise the incredible impact that high energy bills have had on people in the context of that wider cost of living challenge with which so many people are still not just dealing but reeling from.
521 Scots died last year, 22-23, because literally they lived in a cold and damp home or they couldn't put the heating on. We know that those figures have already increased to over 900 already, and it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. We're vilified for drug deaths in this country, but we're not talking about the deaths, needless deaths of people because they live in cold homes and they can't afford to heat their homes or they can't afford to eat. People that have prepayment meters enforced on them, you're constantly living with a horrible fear of, are my lights going to go off? Will the kids have enough light to do their homework tonight? Can I cook that pasta off? And they're paying them more than somebody who pays direct debit with nine bedrooms and the lights on all night, who doesn't know what it feels like to put a blanket over their legs to try and feel warm. That's how unjust the society is right now. So that has to change. I think there was not a coroner's decision just last month about the young lad, the 2-year-old that died in Rochdale. The coroner recorded it was mould that killed that wee boy. And it's not going to get any better unless we accelerate this process.
These are some of the challenges that I think we face for our property transition to net zero. Funding, time, the spend and the number of projects annually is significant. Decant properties are operational and occupied. Technical, I would say the direction at the moment's not entirely clear. There are solutions out there, likes of Retrofit, but I would say there's not consensus. And there's the cost of electricity versus gas, which I'm always reminded of by our engineering team. Electricity being about 4 times the cost of gas at the moment. The capacity of the construction market has been highlighted as an issue in a number of forums. Local authority resources are obviously consideration there as well.
I've tried to persuade clients that there is a route to invest in district heating systems by setting up a small energy company, and then they can borrow the money on future income. But then they say, well, I've got to be here forever looking after this, and I'm a developer and I want to build and bugger off, basically. Who should be taking on that mantle? Is that local authorities? Is that a good thing for them to become energy companies to deliver, etc.? Is there a Scottish Government agency who should be doing that? We generally end up having our energy consultants saying, just stick an air source heat pump on the side of every house. Everyone can look at it, work it, etc. I've also done geothermal for larger developments, and they're all broken, which is a major issue.
What would improve that delivery landscape to make us be able to accelerate and scale up delivery?
A bit more central government guidance as to how to achieve these things and what sort of energy company can take the lead there.
If you want to insulate one property or one flat, then it becomes too expensive. So the payback, as you say, long term doesn't justify the capital expenditure, which some people might not have.
Some of our clients are spending 25% of their home's value on retrofit, which is a huge investment. But they're not looking at payback because you can't put a price on your own health.
Individual property, one at a time, simply isn't efficient. Whereas if you're doing it on a community or multiple street, multiple house, whatever it is basis, you can bring those costs down. It needs to be about community engagement, it needs to be about their involvement, maybe even to a certain degree a level of co-design, although I take account of the fact that this is a very technical area. So people aren't going to be able to sort of co-design their own energy system, but there is an element in there of being able to take these communities on that journey to not only bring the costs down, but to take them on the journey, get them to understand how they can manage their boiler efficiency, as part of the whole system. Otherwise, you're going to end up with one or two houses in these areas paying an absolute fortune to do a few bits and pieces, and everybody else getting missed.
Yeah. If you look at energy efficiency and investing in energy efficiency, it's not that sexy, and you don't get the model isn't set up for. There's not a model for energy efficiency to get a nice thing that's going to turn the capitalist head and think, we're going to invest wholesale in that. Whereas heat networks, you think, right, a sexy product, big capital, going to get a long-term 40-year payback, I can go with that.
I think it's really important that we see the transition not just as an energy transition, but as this huge opportunity to improve the buildings that we spend 90% of our days in. I run an architectural practice where we do assessments of homes and we make a plan, and for me that is key. We need a plan for the transition. If we've got to get to zero emissions by 2045, we need a plan, a detailed plan of how we're going to get there. And that's what we do for every home. And that's what I think we should have for every home in Scotland, is a retrofit plan. It's really expensive, it's going to take a lot of time and materials and resources, but let's have a plan and work out stage by stage how we can do it. Because by the time we've got all those plans, we'll know how many people we need to do it, we'll know how much it's going to cost, what materials we'll need, what skills we'll need, what the energy demand of that location is going to be by the time we've done that. And that opens all sorts of other opportunities as well. I speak to one of the big energy companies at the moment, and it feels like one of my just fears, and I hope someone can allay me of this, is that the government is going to the energy industries and asking them to help decarbonise buildings. The energy industries don't actually know anything about buildings. We do, but we don't really have that robust kind of network ready to go that's there to help sort of deliver this.
What you end up with is energy companies who are told, if you don't sell or insulate X amount of houses or reduce carbon, you will get a hefty fine. So they go out there into this Wild West and they're paying companies. People that are going into these houses to do these energy assessments are not properly trained. They get a very, very basic bit of paper that says they're authorised to do it after doing an online training course. No, they've not got a building background.
Now I'm going to show you a presentation from Jonathan Ratter, who lives in Orkney and is a householder who is sharing his retrofit experience. I'm showing you the presentation he gave to the Zero Retrofit Conference. It's a cautionary tale.
The first stage was to get an energy assessment by Home Energy Scotland. They referred me on to, and he said, you qualify for free internal wall insulation. And none of these people have a retrofit qualification. The previous providers went bust. Basically, they'd got £7,500 to spend on my house. I went back to the Home Energy Scotland report, and even using their figures, which are just standardised figures, the cost of internal wall insulation came out at 11,200. So I was wondering how they would square that circle. And the guy who turned up to do the technical survey was very friendly, but it turned out that his career up till then had been in the sheet piling industry. The technical guy knew nothing about retrofit, which didn't inspire me with confidence. He showed me what he was going to use. This is a Kingspan phenolic foam bonded to plasterboard, and he was going to put that on the inside walls. We went round the house and he explained no doing the flanking walls or the floor void or anything. No, they can't take the meters off, so they just leave the insulation off around the meters. Front door, not enough space to get the insulation in, so they just put plasterboard there. They can't do the staircase, but it would reduce the width, so they leave that out. The sort of cold and leaky bathroom and the cold kitchen, well, that's not a problem because they don't do it. So the coldest rooms in the house don't get any attention whatsoever. Basically, I've written down the principles of retrofit, all completely ignored. And if I'd allowed them to do that to my house, I mean, first of all, it would be ineffective. And secondly, they're storing up some pretty serious problems of damp and mould and possibly long-term rot in timbers.
Probably the better way of doing it is, instead of asking the energy companies to go and engage in these contractors and get people to do the work, is just say to them, look, we want you to spend £400 million over a course of a period of years, so we're going to take that pot of money and we're going to give it to the people who know what needs done. So we will allocate an X amount to the island communities where insulating properties is incredibly difficult, is incredibly expensive, and we will target them because those areas are the ones that miss out because they're so hard to reach and so expensive to do. Whereas from the energy companies' perspective, they don't like spending the money, but they know they have to, so they want to spend it in the most cost-effective way and in the cheapest way that they can, which means a lot of the work that's done is put into properties that actually, from experience, some properties get insulated 3-4 times during the course of several obligations. So we need to give the ideas of where to spend the money to the people that know where it needs done.
Everywhere is different. You need to know what the people in those places actually need. What is it they require? And the best way to do that is some level of community engagement and working collaboratively with these communities rather than just coming into somewhere, right, we've got some money to spend, where are we going to go? So it's that piece of both collaboration and accountability, and to have a certain degree of accountability to the communities.
We are an impact investor. Impact investing is where you're investing directly to create those impacts and those outcomes. So that's what we consider ourselves in Scotland. We invest between 1 and 50 million. In businesses. We've made 3 investments, so Indie Nature, who I understand have already had a call out this morning, so we invested 8.5 million in them. We have invested 16 million in Sunamp, who do innovative heat batteries. They're based out in East Lothian, and also 5 million in Utopia, which is like a building management sort of systems, like smart tech for managing the energy and heat of a building.
When we're talking about funders, we have the same potential issue with siloed thinking as we do politically and everything else. So funders are asking for everything to be delivered, yet they as a funder often have one key outcome. That's often how it works. But to an extent, it's a case of ensuring that funders work collaboratively. If you work together, there'll be a much greater investment from a number of funders, but there'll also be a much greater benefit and output through that collaborative effect. That would definitely be something that I'd like to see a lot more of.
Can we map a funding journey? So Indy Nature we supported through Zero Waste Scotland, Nick, if you remember, right? We helped them become investment ready. They then have gone on and subsequently got 8.5 million from SNIB, from I'm just hearing from Gemma. Right? So there's a really great success story, but they started with a big idea, a big vision, out of academia, I suppose, in a way, took that into then how can they get investment ready through a little accelerator we were delivering with Zero Waste Scotland, to then go through these stages of funding. Now, that's a great success story that if you think, 8.5 million is a headline figure, but what was actually happening before then?
Been trying to get a retrofit hub going in the northeast. We made an application to the Just Transition Fund that was rejected. We've tried to make another application to the UK SPF fund, which also just got rejected. There doesn't seem to be this kind of like early stage feasibility funding available anywhere. Right now, there's quite a few stumbling blocks when it comes to financing, improving our buildings. The first one is the way funding is delivered for people trying to improve their home is it's measure by measure. You know, you can get a bit of money for floor insulation, a bit of money for wall insulation. And what we really need is a whole house approach. And that means looking at the building as one system. And in some of the buildings that we look at, you know, performing air tightness improvements, so sealing the building up better, can actually be far more cost effective than insulating a floor. But we don't, at the moment, look at the system holistically, and so we're not making best use of those funds because we're directing them to certain measures. So we need a whole house approach to retrofit, and that would make far better use of the money that's available from entities like the Energy Savings Trust. But then we also have to think at scale. And at the moment, we know that there's lots of private finance out there that's interested in large-scale projects, but there's actually a lack of funding at the start of the supply chain because, for example, I'm looking at a large-scale retrofit model for my own village where I live in Aberdeenshire, but it's been almost impossible to actually get feasibility funding to develop that model into something that's tangible that we can take to big funding organisations.
We've heard a few different things today about there's not enough money, there is enough money, there's no projects, and so our take is that there isn't enough projects to put money into. We need to stimulate that pipeline. Like if we're not seeing enough projects, we're not seeing enough businesses saying, we see the opportunity, right? I think everyone can say we see the need for taking action on this, but we need to flip that into, we need like people to see it as an opportunity. And we as a public institution have said we'll fund between 1 and 50. Once you get to the stage of what they call institutional investors, that's like your pension funds, you know, who have huge volumes of money, they generally aren't that interested until you get to about 500 million. So if you're talking about lots of tiny projects, it's really hard to kind of bridge between those things. So there has to be, as well as that supporting the pipeline of what the actual projects are, there's then another stage we think about how do you aggregate those things up and make them make sense, but in a way that supports the projects rather than, you know, just supporting sort of returns or anything like that. But what we see our role is, and what I think success for us would look like, is that we find some of these models that are like those scaled area-based schemes. Capital, we come in, we prove that it works, and then other investors will go, it's okay, we'll invest in that because we can see that it works.
For me, there is such a lot going on in this space. There's such a lot of policies. There's such a lot of action plans. It's almost like a gold rush to activity.
All the policies are great, but policy's free. And so if we are going to have a route, and this sounds very negative, would we be better actually in having more realistic policy, or at least prioritising incrementally what are the first stages we should do, what are the second, so it actually becomes achievable? Because at the moment there's this utopian dream up there, everything's retrofit to a certain, and we haven't got the money at the moment. I mean, yes, I know we could do, if we put all the money that we put in to bail out the banks, in theory it could happen. But let's say it doesn't, then I think we need a plan that is incremental of what are the most important things to do now and work our way up slowly. And so it becomes a bit more realistically and everyone isn't disillusioned.
We need to be able to do something now, but we also need to plan for the future as well. So I think there's this real kind of contradiction of time and actually thinking of it in smaller chunks and which can be funded in a climate of urgency.
I spent a lot of time talking with financiers. They measure value strictly in money. In many of these questions, the time question and the value question is a juxtaposition of micro and macroeconomics. This idea of it has to show on a balance sheet, it has to show it on quarterly reports, yearly budgets. Those are very much microeconomic questions. But if we're talking about long-term return on value, however, in this case monetary value, it has to be done through this larger macroeconomic policy. Like there's only going to be so many pension funds that are going to be that patient capital. There's not a big capital market for that. And it has to be the government that sets that agenda, not necessarily where the money comes from per se, but they have to sort of set that. And that could be through tax system, that could be through fiscal agenda.
We have more money in the world than we've ever had at any other time in human history. We also happen to have the technology to facilitate a just transition and a move away from fossil fuels. There are several problems associated with that, which some of you already know, but putting those two things together seems to be at the crux of effective finance. Broadly speaking, we have a couple of different financial markets, equity markets, bond markets, that aren't providing enough capital for those solutions. Plus, we have the Scottish Government and Scottish National Investment Bank saying we don't have all the money to put those into place. So that would be the broader sort of challenge we're looking at.
Did you say that you have bond and equity markets which are quite capable of providing enough finance, but they're not doing so?
That's right.
Okay. And because we're not asking them in the right way, or because they're messing up?
That's a complicated question. Yeah, so it depends. So if capital markets, however you want to frame them, finance, is about people putting money in and that money eventually coming back to them, the question is how long and how much?
I think if you're wanting to look at returns, the case is quite simple. You're not going to make money if everyone's dead. You want to talk macroeconomy. By keeping people alive, how much revenue are they putting into the economy as their lives continue?
Money must be connected to the people, end user and nature. If you don't consider these 2 points, it's just pointless to work on any money, any finance.
I don't disagree, but no, because I talk to people that do this on a day-to-day basis as practitioners, right? They're not convinced by those arguments. They're like, yes, I broadly agree with these sentiments, but my day-to-day job is still putting out money to make money. And so if a finance is to be effective, short of a change in the larger political economy, how do you work with that?
In that case, it's going to be effective only to those companies. It's not going to be effective to the end user, to the people.
The rapacious demand of capitalists for quick profits at very little risk is our problem.
Could be. And if you're talking about private equity financiers, that could be. But there are some really interesting projects looking to crack this nut. So looking at ways of non-exploitative finance, community finance, that would facilitate sort of a place-based, scale-based transition.
I think that you're right, there is money there, but we're not using it effectively, partly because government is getting in the way. And that's it's.
We've just heard that the money won't come into this stuff without government intervention.
There is already schemes where the money is, when money's coming in from private companies because government has told them you have to spend X amount of your money on this, otherwise you're going to get hit with a whopping great fine. So there is money there.
Yeah, but my solution to that is nationalise the lot, because they don't actually have an interest in the eco scheme. That's what you're saying. The private energy suppliers did not have an interest in reducing demand for what they were selling. A state company which has got custody of the entire system.
It was even worse when it was a state company.
So
it was much more effective.
It's not true. That money has been generated by us, and it's gone to some very rich people. We want it back into our systems, and therefore we have to set the rules through which we require those companies to make it possible.
Out of all the days we've done so far, definitely people seem to be most passionate and verging on argumentative, but I think that's good.
I often feel frustrated and anger in my role, and to some extent, even within government, we to some extent powerless, because this is such a big shift and such a big change, and I know that within myself and with my team, we can't, and actually we can't do this on our own. Whilst on the face value we hold a lot of levers, we hold very few, and we have very limited resource. I really enjoy coming to these events and working with the likes of Sean and Gemma and things, because actually I find collectively we suddenly seem so much bigger and stronger and have so many more ideas. I have heard negative things today about Scottish Government funding schemes, and that, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to kind of say they're all perfect. Yes, there are some structural issues and things that make it difficult, but we also shouldn't forget the really, really good work we do and we see on the ground today, and that we fund within the Scottish Government. And actually that's what keeps me going sometimes when it's tough. I speak to people on the ground whose lives are fundamentally changed by some of our interventions. It's going out to speak to people who had an intervention by Warmworks in their house. They've had a fantastic experience and their house is warmer, and it's saving, all those kind of knock-on benefits that brings.